If there is one truth about diabetes that nobody can deny, it is that it is increasing at epidemic rates and has been for about the last 50 years. Type 2 diabetes used to be relatively rare, but now it is common. In fact, it's almost expected for anyone who's over 50 and significantly overweight. In a way, this fact ought to be encouraging, however, because if the rate of diabetes remained static, say at 4% of the population, and it never changed from one generation to the next, we would have to feel there just wouldn't be much we could do about it. If we get diabetes, we're just in that unlucky 4%. Too bad for us. But because diabetes is increasing like crazy in our generation, it must mean there is something we're doing, some lifestyle factor or factors that have become a part of our world that did not exist back in the 1800s. If we can just figure out what it is that is so different about our generation that is causing insulin resistance and diabetes, heart attacks and strokes, we ought to be able to figure out what we can do to reverse our situation. So in this video, we'll look at just how different we are from our ancestors and what we can do to get the metabolic health that they enjoyed without ever thinking about it. The whole issue comes down to two concepts: natural and unnatural. The truth is, we are living and eating in a totally unnatural fashion when compared to the way people lived and ate for the last 6,000 years. Starting slowly in the early 20th century and increasing to an ever-rising crescendo today, we have moved from natural to unnatural. But if we can identify these unnatural practices, we should be able to do something about it and turn our life and our health around. So, what is it that we're doing these days that is so terribly unnatural? Well, first of all, we sit for hours every day. Most of us do, something our great-grandparents almost never did. We sit in front of computers at our jobs for most of our work days. Then we get off work and watch television and surf the internet and check our emails. In my childhood, many, if not most people, had gardens that they worked in the summer, but today, almost nobody has a garden. We kids got out of the house as much as we could when we weren't in school. We played sports. We walked to the mall. We had pick-up football games and baseball games and whatever else we could think to play. Today, kids get home from school, go into their rooms, and stare at their phones until dinner. After dinner, they either watch television or stare some more at their phones until bedtime. The other day, I was looking at some street scenes from the 1940s. Most of the men wore hats. Now, that wasn't new to me. I've seen that many times, but the reason for wearing hats suddenly hit me. These men wore hats because they walked a lot. The roads in the big cities in those days were thick with pedestrians, and their hats protected them from rain or the blazing sun. And women on rainy days would have their umbrellas out. You know what? Today we rarely see people with umbrellas. We get into our cars that are parked in our garages, we drive to work or to the store, make a dash to get in the building. But in the 1940s, women might take a bus downtown and then walk blocks all around the neighborhood and check out bargains at different stores. Walking was just common in those days, but not anymore. We do as little walking as possible, which usually means we walk from our car to the store and then back. And we don't like it if we have to park our car back away from the store. We want to be close. Most jobs in the old days, especially pre-20th century, involved a lot of physical labor and movement, but today very few do. We've gone from being a world on the move and working hard to a sedentary people who go through life with ever-increasing sluggish circulation. And as we age, our blood flow becomes feebler and feebler. Another area where our world is living artificially and unnaturally is our diet. We gorge ourselves with carbohydrates and sugar. We just can't get enough of these poisons. It's not that carbohydrates have not been around in ages past, but never in the history of the earth have people eaten them at the rate that we do today. We're bombarded with commercials for carbohydrate-rich foods. We see stand after stand of these foods and snacks when we first enter the grocery store. We have them at meals and for mid-morning snacks, afternoon snacks, and evening snacks. Everywhere you look, it's a carb here and a carb there, here a carb, there a carb, everywhere a carb. People have been eating desserts and sweet treats for a long time, I suppose centuries, but only in the last couple of generations have we insisted on them every day and at nearly every meal. We package them, we preserve them, and we overdose on them. Now, our bodies can stand carbs and sugars for a long time, but at the rate we consume them today, sooner or later, our metabolic system will burn itself out. And when that happens, our blood sugar will skyrocket. People will often go from being pre-diabetic to being extremely diabetic with sky-high diabetes in a year or two. The dam finally just bursts, and huge surges of syrupy sugar fill their blood and overwhelm their weakened bodies. Not only do we eat too many sugars and carbs, we eat just too much food, period. Our portion sizes have increased in the last generation. We go to a restaurant and we're often served enough food to feed 2 people, or maybe 2 adults and 1 child. After a while, our idea of proper portions of food has changed, and we now believe it is our inherent right to eat huge amounts of food at every meal, large breakfasts, big lunches, and monster-sized dinners. So when you put these factors together, too much food, too much of the wrong foods, which would be carbs and sugars, enormous portion sizes, too many snacks, and a couch potato sedentary lifestyle, well, we have created the perfect storm for metabolic disaster, and we are truly reaping it. The result is we have more obesity in our generation than any previous generation since the world began. If you look at crowds from even the 60s and 70s, you can see that even then most people were still either slim or normal. Today, look at most pictures of crowds in America, and I'm sure in many other countries, you'll find that most people are just too heavy, and too much weight around the stomach often means visceral fat on the organs on the inside, especially the liver and the pancreas, which is a recipe for diabetes. So what is the answer? Well, there's no time machines for us to jump into and go back and live in 1885. We cannot just snap our fingers and make the mountains of sodas, breakfast cereals, sugar-laced pastries, and other metabolic monsters disappear. And many of us, including me, depend on sitting at computers for significant portions of our days in order to function and make a living. As much as we bemoan the unnatural nature of 21st century living, there are certain aspects of it we just cannot escape. But what we can do is counterbalance the unnatural aspects of our lifestyles with healthy habits. And this can be very much done. If your job requires you to sit at a desk for much of the day, guess what? You can get up early and go for a walk or use a treadmill. Or you could just do this after work. You can lift weights or do push-ups 2 or 3 days a week. You don't have to make yourself into a national bodybuilder. Just toning up those flabby muscles a little bit could help. Of course, you could get a gym membership, but the truth is regular walking and doing some push-ups several times a week would probably be a major improvement for most folks. When it comes to diet, we can attempt to eat more like our great-grandparents did back in the days when there was no soda, no packages of chips, no candy. Sure, they may have eaten a little fruit, but they usually ate it mostly when it was in season, and they just had it occasionally. There were no nutritionists telling them they must gorge themselves on 5 or 6 portions of fruit every day, winter, summer, spring, and fall. Instead of ingesting 250 to 300 grams of carbs per day, we can stay under 100 grams per day. And for many of us, 50 or 60 would be better still. Several years ago, I interviewed my sister about the struggles our mom had with diabetes. At one point, she contrasted Mom with Dad. She said Mom, who was diabetic and ended up with both her legs amputated, snacked almost constantly throughout the day. Then she stated Dad never snacked. He simply ate his meals every day, and that was it. Mom was somewhat overweight, wasn't huge, but Dad weighed about 130 pounds on his 5 feet 7 inch frame all the days I can remember him. Dad lived to be 87. He never had diabetes and was almost never sick, except in that last 6 months to a year of his life. Even in his 80s, his doctor told him he had the blood pressure of a teenager. Dad was 9 years older than Mom, and he was born in 1909. He grew up in a very small town in Iowa, and he had that lean, tough look that many small-town Americans had in those days. They worked hard, lived simply, and rarely ate packaged, sugary pastries or treats. Now, I will admit Dad did love it when Mom made a pie as a dessert after supper, but he took small pieces, almost as though he was afraid of the moral consequences of eating a large piece of that decadent pie. No, we cannot turn back our culture, nor can we turn back the clock on our body, but we can, by God's grace, transform our lifestyles and dietary habits. For our own sake and for the sake of our families, we can adopt a lifestyle that promotes health rather than destroys it. One Pakistani man shared with this channel how he'd become overweight and diabetic by eating all the sugary pastries and treats that were available in his nation of Pakistan. Then he thought about how his grandparents had lived and eaten and worked hard in their small Pakistani village years ago, and he decided he would simply imitate them in his diet. He called his new diet a village diet. And sure enough, the pounds began to come off, and his blood sugar meekly dropped back down into a normal, non-diabetic range. The diabetic epidemic in our world is still raging and probably will continue to rage for a long time, but that does not mean we have to blindly follow the pattern of our culture. We can rebel, we can say no to a miserable blood sugar spiking, artery clogging, liver destroying diabetic lifestyle, and we can begin to live a more natural way, eating healthy, real foods and keeping a strict guard over how many carbs and sugars go into our mouths each day. And using our glucose meter as our guide, we will soon find that this way of life strikes a lethal blow against insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, hyperinsulinemia, and diabetes. Let the others laugh at us and mock us if they will, but a long, healthy, productive life will be our reward, and it will be well worth the price we pay. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.